The smell hit Dr. Rebecca Walsh before she even turned the corner. Something rotten mixed with chemical cleaner, sharp enough to make her eyes water. She'd been tracking a strange heat signature near the waste disposal area for the past hour, her scanner beeping steadily as she walked through the dimly lit maintenance corridor of Arcturus 7 station. Nobody came down here unless they had to. The station's garbage systems weren't exactly pleasant, and most crew members avoided this level entirely. But Rebecca's xenobiology training had taught her one important lesson. Unusual readings usually meant something alive, and something alive deserved attention. The beeping grew louder as she approached a cluster of discarded containers near the incinerator chute. She raised her scanner, squinting at the thermal display. 3 distinct heat sources, small and weak, huddled together behind a broken crate. Rebecca knelt down and pulled the crate aside. Her breath caught in her throat. 3 small creatures lay tangled together in a pile of chemical-stained rags. They looked like miniature dragons, each about the size of a large dog with scaled bodies and folded wings. But their coloring was wrong. Instead of the vibrant reds, golds, and greens she'd seen on adult Dracari walking through the station, these hatchlings were pure white, albino. Their scales looked almost transparent in the harsh corridor lighting. One of them lifted its head weakly, milky eyes struggling to focus on her face. It made a small clicking sound deep in its throat, barely audible over the hum of the ventilation system. "Oh no," Rebecca whispered. She'd read about Dracari reproduction in her xenobiology courses, but seeing hatchlings in person was rare. Seeing them abandoned like trash was unthinkable. She activated her comm unit. "Walsh to Medical Bay. I need emergency supplies sent to Maintenance Level 7, Section 12. 3 juvenile aliens, malnutrition and chemical exposure." "Acknowledged," came the reply. "What species?" Rebecca hesitated. "Dracari hatchlings." A pause. "Dr. Walsh, if those are Dracari young, you need to contact their embassy immediately. We can't interfere with their—" "They're dying," Rebecca cut in. "I'm not waiting for diplomatic clearance." She ended the transmission and carefully scooped up the smallest hatchling. It weighed almost nothing, all bone and scale with hardly any muscle. The creature made another clicking sound, this one more distressed, and the other 2 hatchlings stirred weakly in response. "It's okay," Rebecca said softly, gathering the other 2 against her chest. "I've got you now, you're safe." Getting them back to her quarters without being seen proved impossible. By the time she reached the residential levels, a crowd had gathered. Station personnel stared as she hurried past, cradling 3 white dragon hatchlings in her arms. Lieutenant Daniel Ross from station security stepped into her path. He was a tall man with graying hair and the tired eyes of someone who'd seen too much bureaucracy. "Dr. Walsh, what exactly are you doing?" "My job," Rebecca said. "These animals need medical attention." "Those aren't animals, they're Dracari citizens." Ross crossed his arms. "You can't just take them." "Someone threw them away like garbage." Rebecca's voice hardened. "Are you really going to stand there and tell me to put them back in the trash?" Ross looked at the hatchlings. One of them had opened its eyes and was watching him with an oddly intelligent gaze. The lieutenant's expression softened slightly. "You're going to cause a diplomatic incident." "Then let it be an incident." Rebecca moved past him. "I'm not letting them die." Her quarters were small, designed for a single occupant, but she cleared space quickly. She laid the hatchlings on her bed and began examining them properly under better lighting. Their condition was worse than she'd thought. Chemical burns covered their undersides, several claws were broken, and their rib cages showed clearly through their pale scales. The medical supplies arrived within minutes, brought by a nervous ensign who wouldn't meet her eyes. Rebecca thanked him and got to work, cleaning wounds, administering basic nutrients, and wrapping the worst burns in synthetic skin patches. The hatchlings stayed quiet through it all, barely moving. Only their eyes tracked her movements, watching everything she did with careful attention. 3 hours later, a tone sounded at her door. Rebecca looked up from adjusting the room's temperature controls. The scanner she'd set up showed that the hatchlings needed warmer conditions than standard station atmosphere. "Enter," she called. The door slid open to reveal a massive Dracari. He stood nearly 8 feet tall, scales the color of burnished copper, with swept-back horns and eyes like molten gold. Traditional warrior markings covered his arms, and he wore the formal robes of a diplomatic envoy. "Dr. Walsh." His voice rumbled like distant thunder. "I am War Chief Garen, ambassador for the Dracari people. I understand you have taken possession of certain items that belong to my embassy." Rebecca stood up, positioning herself between Garen and the sleeping hatchlings. "These aren't items, they're children." "They are refuse." Garen's expression didn't change. "Albino hatchlings are defective. They bring dishonor to their clutch and weakness to the bloodline. Our traditions are clear. Such creatures must be eliminated." "Eliminated?" Rebecca felt her hands curl into fists. "You mean murdered?" "I mean released from the burden of an impossible existence." Garen stepped into the room, forcing Rebecca to crane her neck to maintain eye contact. "No albino dragon has ever survived to adulthood in 10,000 years of Dracari history. They are too weak, too flawed. What you are doing is cruel, prolonging suffering that should end swiftly." "They're not suffering," Rebecca said. "They're healing." "For now." Garen looked past her at the hatchlings. "But when they grow and realize what they are, when they understand that no Dracari will ever accept them, when they see themselves as the broken things they are, then the suffering will truly begin. You are not saving them, Doctor. You are torturing them." One of the hatchlings stirred at the sound of Garen's voice. The smallest one, the first to have looked at Rebecca in the corridor. It lifted its head and stared at the warchief with those cloudy eyes. Garen stared back. For a long moment, neither moved. Then the hatchling made a small sound, not the clicking from before, but something else, almost like a question. Garen turned away. "I will file a formal complaint with station authorities. These creatures belong to the Dracari people, and I expect them returned within 48 hours for proper disposal." "No," Rebecca said simply. The warchief stopped at the door. "You do not understand what you are interfering with, human. This is not your culture, not your species, not your choice. It became my choice when someone threw 3 living beings in the garbage." Rebecca crossed her arms. "And I'm not backing down." Garen left without another word. The door slid shut behind him, leaving Rebecca alone with the hatchlings. The smallest one was still watching her. It stretched out one tiny clawed foot, reaching toward where she stood. Rebecca walked back to the bed and sat down carefully. The hatchling crawled forward, dragging itself across the blankets until it could press its scaled head against her hand. "I'll call you Pearl," Rebecca whispered, stroking the white scales gently. "And your siblings can be Frost and Ghost. You're not refuse, you're not defective, and I'm going to prove it." 72 hours had passed since Rebecca found the hatchlings, and none of them were eating. She tried everything the Dracari medical databases suggested, but every time she entered search terms related to albino hatchlings, the system returned the same message: no data available for terminated specimens. Pearl lay curled in the corner of Rebecca's bed, her breathing shallow. Frost had stopped moving entirely, and Ghost only lifted his head when Rebecca touched him. The synthetic skin patches she'd applied were helping with the burns, but malnutrition was winning. Rebecca sat at her desk, scrolling through research files at 3 in the morning. Her eyes burned with fatigue, but she couldn't stop. Somewhere in these records had to be an answer. A soft tone at her door made her jump. She opened it to find Lieutenant Ross standing in the corridor, holding a thermal container. "Can't sleep either." He walked in without waiting for invitation. "Figured you could use real food instead of ration bars." Rebecca took the container gratefully. Inside was fresh stew still steaming. "Thank you." Ross looked at the hatchlings. "How are they?" "Dying." The word came out flat. Rebecca was too tired to soften it. "I can't figure out what they need. Every database says albino hatchlings don't survive, but nobody explains why." "Maybe because they're not supposed to." Ross pulled up a chair. "I talked to some of the Dracari crew members, off the record, away from the embassy. They all say the same thing. Albino hatchlings are cursed. They're seen as bad luck, signs of weakness in the bloodline." "That's superstition, not biology." "Maybe," Ross leaned back. "But superstition shapes behavior. If everyone believes albino hatchlings can't survive, nobody tries to save them. They get abandoned, they die, and that reinforces the belief." Rebecca stared at him. "A self-fulfilling prophecy." "Exactly." Ross nodded toward her computer. "Stop looking for albino hatchling care. Look for normal hatchling care, then adapt it." It was so obvious that Rebecca wanted to kick herself. She pulled up the regular Dracari hatchling protocols and started reading. Within minutes, she found the problem. "Temperature cycling," she said aloud. "Normal hatchlings need to move between hot and cool zones throughout the day. It helps their metabolism develop properly." Her quarters maintained a steady 72 degrees. She'd raised it to 80 when she found the hatchlings, but they needed more than that. They needed variation. Rebecca jumped up and started rearranging her room. She moved her desk lamp to shine directly on one corner of the bed, creating a heat spot. She opened the vent control to let cooler air flow across the opposite side. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. "Help me move them," she said to Ross. Together they carefully repositioned the hatchlings, so each one had access to both warm and cool areas. Pearl stirred slightly as they moved her, making a sound that might have been protest. "Come on," Rebecca whispered. "Work with me here." An hour later, Frost lifted his head. He turned it slowly, as if testing the air, then dragged himself toward the warm corner. His movements were weak but deliberate. Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. "That's it, good boy." Ghost followed his brother a few minutes later. Pearl took longer, but eventually she too crawled toward the heat lamp, settling herself partially in the light and partially in shadow. "They're learning," Ross said quietly. "They're figuring out what they need." Over the next week, the hatchling's condition improved dramatically. Once Rebecca established the temperature zones, they began eating. Not much at first, just small pieces of the protein supplements she'd synthesized, but it was progress. She learned their personalities through careful observation. Pearl was curious, always watching Rebecca work, tracking her movements around the room. Frost showed problem-solving skills, figuring out how to knock over the water dispenser when he wanted attention. Ghost positioned himself near the door whenever anyone approached, small body tense despite his weakness. Patricia Lee from engineering started visiting regularly. She'd bring scrap metal pieces and watch as the hatchlings tried to manipulate them with their claws. "They're smart," she said one evening. "Look at how Ghost is trying to stack those pieces. That's tool use." "The Dracari say albino hatchlings are mentally deficient," Rebecca replied. "Another reason they're considered worthless." "The Dracari are wrong." Patricia picked up one of the metal pieces and held it out to Pearl. The small hatchling examined it carefully, then used her tail to knock it toward Frost. "That's communication, intentional sharing of resources." Rebecca documented everything: temperature preferences, dietary needs, social behaviors, cognitive development. She was building a case, proof that these hatchlings could survive and thrive if given proper care. On day 12, Warchief Garen returned. This time he brought an official from the Galactic Council, a crystalline being named Talvin who spoke in chiming tones. "Dr. Walsh," Talvin said, "we have reviewed the Dracari complaint regarding your possession of their biological property." "They're not property," Rebecca started, but Talvin held up one translucent hand. Please allow me to finish." The crystalline being gestured toward the hatchlings, who had all frozen at the sight of Garen. The Dracari have provided extensive cultural and historical documentation supporting their claim that albino hatchlings are non-viable. They argue that your actions, while well-intentioned, are prolonging inevitable death and causing unnecessary suffering. "Look at them," Rebecca said. "Do they look like they're suffering?" Talvin approached the bed slowly. Pearl pressed herself against Ghost, both hatchlings watching the crystal being with wide eyes. But Frost did something unexpected. He stepped forward, placing himself between Talvin and his siblings. The small white dragon stood there, trembling with effort, barely able to support his own weight. But he held his ground, protecting his family. Talvin stopped. The crystalline being tilted its head, light refracting through its body in rainbow patterns. "Remarkable." "They're bobbies," Rebecca said. "Scared, abandoned bobbies who are just trying to survive. The Dracari threw them away because of superstition, not science." "Can you prove that?" Talvin asked. "Give me time and I will." War Chief Garen stepped forward. "The Council does not have time to waste on human sentiment. These creatures are abominations by our laws. Return them immediately." "No." Rebecca moved to stand beside Frost, one hand resting gently on the hatchling's head. "I claim them under Earth's protection as endangered sentient beings." "They are not sentient," Garen said. "Then let me prove they are." Rebecca looked at Talvin. "Give me 3 months. If I can demonstrate that these hatchlings are healthy, intelligent, and viable, then the Dracari have to acknowledge their practices are based on prejudice, not fact." Talvin was quiet for a long moment. "And if you fail?" Rebecca swallowed hard. "Then I'll return them to Dracari custody." "Agreed." Talvin made a gesture that might have been a nod. 3 months, Dr. Walsh. Document everything." After they left, Rebecca sank down onto the bed. Pearl immediately crawled into her lap, followed by Ghost. Frost remained standing for a moment longer, then collapsed against her side, exhausted from his brave display. "I just promised to prove you're worth saving," Rebecca whispered to them. "No pressure." Pearl made a small chirping sound and pressed her snout against Rebecca's palm. It felt almost like a promise in return. Month 2 brought changes Rebecca hadn't expected. The hatchlings had tripled in size, each now roughly the size of a small pony. Her quarters had become impossibly cramped, forcing Lieutenant Ross to authorize use of an empty storage bay on the recreational level. The new space made an enormous difference. Pearl, Frost, and Ghost could finally spread their wings properly, practicing the movements they'd need for flight. Rebecca watched them every evening, recording their progress on her tablet while they tumbled and played. But it was their intelligence that truly amazed her. Patricia Lee had built a series of puzzle boxes, simple mechanisms with treats hidden inside. The hatchlings had figured out all of them within a week. Now Patricia was designing more complex challenges, ones that required cooperation between all 3 dragons. "Watch this," Patricia said, activating her latest creation. It was a transparent cylinder with food visible at the bottom. 3 separate locks held the access panel closed, each lock positioned too far apart for a single hatchling to reach them all. Ghost examined the cylinder first, circling it slowly. He made a low humming sound and his siblings approached. Pearl moved to the left lock while Frost took the right. Ghost positioned himself at the center lock. They worked in perfect synchronization. Rebecca heard the soft clicks as each lock disengaged simultaneously. The panel swung open, and the hatchlings shared the treats inside equally. "That's coordination," Patricia said. "That's communication and planning. I don't care what the Dracari say. These 3 are brilliant." Rebecca typed notes into her tablet, documenting everything. But in the back of her mind, worry gnawed at her. Intelligence wasn't enough. The Dracari claimed albino hatchlings were physically weak, unable to survive the harsh realities of their culture. Garen would demand physical tests, and Rebecca wasn't sure her three could pass them. That night, while the hatchlings slept, Rebecca accessed the restricted section of the station's historical database. She'd been searching for information about Dracari culture, trying to understand why the albino prejudice ran so deep. What she found made her blood run cold. Ancient texts, over 3,000 years old, described albino Dracari very differently than modern sources. They were called void seers, dragons who could navigate the darkness between stars, who possessed unique abilities to sense danger before it manifested. According to the texts, void seers had once been highly valued, even revered. They served as guides and protectors for Dracari exploration fleets. Then the documents changed. About 2,000 years ago, a series of reports described a clan war. The ruling family at the time, the Garen lineage, had systematically eliminated rival clans. One of those rival clans had produced an unusually high number of albino dragons. The propaganda campaign that followed was brutal and effective. Void seers became cursed ones. Their abilities were reframed as disabilities. Their white coloring became a mark of shame rather than distinction. Within 3 generations, the practice of abandoning albino hatchlings had become standard. Within 5, it was considered merciful rather than cruel. It was genocide, Rebecca whispered to herself. They killed off an entire genetic line because of politics. She downloaded everything she could find, encrypting the files carefully. This was evidence that could change everything, but it was also dangerous. The current warchief Garen was a direct descendant of the family that had orchestrated the original campaign. A soft chirping sound made her look up. Pearl stood in the doorway, watching her with those strange pale eyes that seemed to catch and reflect light in unusual ways. "Can't sleep either?" Rebecca asked. Pearl walked over and laid her head on Rebecca's lap. The hatchling had grown so much that she barely fit anymore, but Rebecca stroked her scales gently. "I found something important," Rebecca said quietly, "about your kind, about what you used to be before fear and politics destroyed it." Pearl made a questioning sound. "You're not broken," Rebecca continued. "You're rare, special, and someone a long time ago was so threatened by that they convinced an entire species to throw away their own children." The white dragon's eyes seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. Rebecca had noticed this before, how all 3 hatchlings emitted a soft bioluminescence when the lights were dim. It was beautiful and eerie at the same time. "I'm going to prove it," Rebecca promised. "I'm going to show everyone what was taken from them." The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. A young Dracari female, barely out of adolescence by her size, appeared at the storage bay door. She wore the plain clothes of station maintenance rather than embassy finery. "Please don't report me," she said quickly. "I just wanted to see them, the white ones." Rebecca positioned herself protectively. "Who are you?" "My name is Lyra. I work in the environmental systems." The young Dracari's eyes were fixed on the hatchlings who had woken at the sound of her voice. "My grandmother told me stories. She said she had a brother once, white as snow. Her parents took him away when she was small and she never saw him again." "How old was she when this happened?" Rebecca asked carefully. 5 years old. She's 90 now." Lyra took a hesitant step closer. She said her brother was the smartest of all their clutch. He could find his way in the dark when none of the others could, but her parents said he was broken and the clan elders took him. Ghost approached slowly, examining Lyra with cautious interest. The young Dracari froze. "It's okay," Rebecca said. "He won't hurt you." "I'm not afraid of him." Lyra's voice cracked. "I'm afraid of what we did, what we've been doing for so long that we forgot it was wrong." Ghost reached out one clawed foot and touched Lyra's hand gently. The Dracari stared down at the contact, tears forming in her golden eyes. "He would have been like this," she whispered. My grandmother's brother, smart and gentle and brave. Over the next week, Lyra returned every day. She brought other young Dracari with her, station workers who had heard whispered family stories about white siblings who disappeared. Each one came prepared to be horrified by defective monsters. Each one left changed by what they actually saw. "They're not what we were taught," one of them said, watching Frost solve a particularly complex puzzle that involved pulling levers in a specific sequence. "Everything we learned is wrong." Rebecca documented these visits too. Young Dracari interacting peacefully with albino hatchlings, their prejudices crumbling in the face of direct experience. It was powerful evidence, but she knew it wouldn't be enough. War Chief Garen represented the old guard, the traditional power structure. He would never accept change based on the testimony of maintenance workers and historical texts. He would demand a trial, a demonstration of strength according to ancient Dracari customs. And Rebecca had no idea how to prepare 3 6-month-old hatchlings for tests designed to prove they deserved to die. The summons came exactly 90 days after Rebecca had made her promise to Talvin. War Chief Garen stood in the storage bay with the crystalline mediator, both watching the hatchlings with very different expressions. 3 months have passed, Talvin announced. "Dr. Walsh, you claimed these hatchlings could prove themselves viable by Dracari standards. War Chief Garen has invoked the ancient trial of worth. Do you accept?" Rebecca's stomach dropped. She'd known this was coming but hoped for more time. "What does the trial involve?" Garen smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. 3 tests: strength, navigation, and hunting ability. Standard measurements of worthiness for all young dragons reaching their 7th month. If your albinos pass, I will acknowledge they are not defective. If they fail even one test, they return to Dracari custody. "They're barely 6 months old," Rebecca protested. "Traditional trials happen at 2 years. "Then they should have no difficulty demonstrating early development," Garen replied smoothly. "Unless, of course, they are as weak as I claim." Rebecca looked at Pearl, Frost, and Ghost. They stood together, watching the adults with intelligent wariness. They'd grown so much, learned so much, but they were still bobbies. This wasn't fair. "I'll need 1 week to prepare them," she said. "You have 3 days." Garen turned to leave. "The trial will be held in the main amphitheater. All station residents are invited to witness." After he left, Rebecca sank down onto the floor. The hatchlings surrounded her immediately, sensing her distress. Pearl pressed her snout against Rebecca's cheek, while Ghost positioned himself like a barrier between her and the door. "We're in trouble," Rebecca told them honestly. "They want you to prove you're strong, and I don't know if you're ready." Lieutenant Ross arrived an hour later with Patricia Lee and a dozen other human crew members. They'd heard about the trial. 3 days isn't enough time," Patricia said bluntly. "What are the actual test requirements?" Rebecca pulled up the trial specifications on her tablet. "First test is breaking stone pillars with tail strikes. It measures raw physical strength. Second test is navigating a vertical maze in complete darkness. Tests spatial awareness and flight capability. Third test is tracking and capturing fast-moving targets. Hunting ability." Ross studied the requirements. "These are designed for dragons twice their age and size." "I know," Rebecca felt helpless. "Garen chose them specifically because he knows they'll fail." "Then we don't play by his rules." Patricia's eyes gleamed with the look she got when solving complex engineering problems. "We play smart. These hatchlings are brilliant. They don't need to be stronger, they need to be smarter." Over the next 3 days, the human crew transformed the storage bay into a training facility. For the strength test, Patricia created weighted vests that forced the hatchlings to build specific muscle groups. But more importantly, she taught them about structural weaknesses. "You don't need to hit harder," she explained to Frost, demonstrating on a practice pillar. "You need to hit smarter. See these stress points? One precise strike here does more damage than 10 random hits. Frost watched intently, then practiced. His first attempt missed the mark, but his second strike landed perfectly. The practice pillar cracked along its entire length. Patricia grinned. That's it, precision over power. For the navigation test, Ross convinced Station Command to let them use the reduced gravity cargo bay. It wasn't perfect, but it gave the hatchlings space to practice flying in 3 dimensions. The darkness requirement worried Rebecca until she noticed something during a late-night training session. When all the lights went out, the hatchlings began to glow. Their white scales emitted a soft bioluminescence that let them see each other even in complete blackness. The Void Seer ability, Rebecca breathed. That's what the ancient texts meant. Pearl, Frost, and Ghost could communicate in the darkness through light pulses, creating a visual language that let them coordinate perfectly. What the Dracari saw as a disability was actually an advantage. The hunting test proved trickiest. The chef created moving targets loaded with treats, but the hatchlings struggled with speed. They were still young, their reflexes not fully developed. They can't catch them individually, Rebecca said, frustrated. The targets move too fast. So don't catch them individually. Ross set up 3 targets instead of 1. Hunt as a pack, use tactics. Ghost understood immediately. He positioned himself at one end of the bay while directing Pearl and Frost to the sides with soft chirps and head gestures. When the targets launched, they herded them together, closing in from 3 directions simultaneously. All 3 targets were captured within seconds. Teamwork, Ross said with satisfaction. That's the human specialty. Looks like we taught them something useful. The morning of the trial arrived too quickly. The amphitheater filled with hundreds of aliens, all curious to see the controversial albino hatchlings. Rebecca spotted Lyra and the other young Dracari in the crowd, their faces tense with worry. Warchief Garen stood at the center platform, Talvin beside him. Let the trial of worth begin. The first test involved 3 stone pillars, each 6 feet tall and 2 feet thick. A young Dracari warrior demonstrated the standard method, smashing his tail against a pillar with brutal force. It cracked but didn't break. The warrior hit it again, and again, until finally the pillar collapsed. Your turn, Garen said to Frost. The white hatchling approached the pillar. He was half the size of the warrior who just demonstrated, and Rebecca could hear murmuring from the crowd. No one believed he could succeed. Frost circled the pillar once, examining it carefully. Then he struck, his tail hitting a specific point near the base. The pillar didn't just crack, it shattered, pieces flying in all directions. Silence filled the amphitheater. Frost moved to the second pillar. Another precise strike, another spectacular collapse. The third pillar fell the same way. Garen's expression darkened. Luck, the pillars were flawed. Then provide new pillars, Talvin suggested mildly. Let us ensure the test is fair. 3 new pillars were brought in, these even larger than the first set. Frost repeated his performance exactly. Precision over power, just as Patricia had taught him. The crowd erupted in shocked conversation. Rebecca felt tears of pride in her eyes. Second test, Garen announced, his voice tight with anger. The darkness maze. A massive vertical structure was wheeled into the amphitheater, 50 feet tall with twisting corridors and dead ends. The interior was completely black. 3 targets are hidden inside, Talvin explained. The hatchlings must find all 3 and return to the entrance. Time limit is 10 minutes. Pearl, Frost, and Ghost entered the maze together. The entrance sealed behind them, plunging them into absolute darkness. Rebecca held her breath. This was it. This was where their unique ability would either save them or the darkness would prove too much. From inside the maze, a soft glow began to pulse, then another and another. The crowd pressed forward, trying to see what was happening in the darkness. 4 minutes later, All three hatchlings emerged carrying the targets. They'd worked together, using their bioluminescence to navigate and communicate, completing the test in less than half the allotted time. The amphitheater exploded with noise. The final test should have been simple. 3 flying drones programmed to move in unpredictable patterns, and the hatchlings needed to capture all 3 within 15 minutes. Rebecca had watched them practice this dozens of times. But War Chief Garen was changing the rules. "I invoke my right as challenge issuer to modify the final test," he announced. The crowd quieted, sensing something wrong. These hatchlings have demonstrated adequate problem-solving skills, but the true measure of Drackery worth is individual combat capability. Rebecca's heart sank. That wasn't part of the original trial. Ancient law permits the challenge issuer to substitute one test for personal combat, Talvin said, consulting his data tablet. It is within his rights. Combat against what? Ross demanded from the audience. Garen gestured, and a scarred Drackery warrior entered the amphitheater. He was massive, easily twice the size of the hatchlings, with scales that looked like burnished iron and eyes that held no mercy. "This is Crane, my personal combat instructor. He will face the largest hatchling in single combat. No weapons, no assistance, traditional rules. First to yield or fall unconscious loses." Rebecca stepped forward. "This isn't a test, this is execution." "This is proving they can survive in the real world," Garen countered. "Every young Drackery faces combat trials. Why should your albinos be exempt?" "Because they're 6 months old fighting a trained warrior. Then they will lose quickly and their suffering will be brief." Garen's smile was cold. "Or perhaps you wish to forfeit." Ghost stepped forward before Rebecca could respond. The white hatchling positioned himself between Crane and his siblings, the same protective stance he'd held since he was tiny. "No," Rebecca whispered. "Ghost, you don't have to do this." The hatchling looked back at her, and Rebecca saw understanding in those pale eyes. He knew exactly what this meant. He was choosing it anyway. "If he fights, I need 5 minutes with him first," Rebecca said. "That's traditional for all combat trials." Garen waved dismissively. 5 minutes won't change the outcome." Rebecca knelt beside Ghost in the preparation area while Pearl and Frost pressed close, chirping anxiously. She had no idea how to prepare a baby dragon to fight a trained warrior. All she could do was be honest. "He's bigger and more experienced," she said softly. "You can't beat him with strength." Ghost made a low humming sound, waiting. "But you're smart. You've always been smart." Rebecca thought about everything they'd learned together. "He'll expect you to fight like a traditional dragon. Direct attacks, power moves. Don't give him what he expects." She ran her hands over Ghost's scales, checking for injuries from earlier tests. Her fingers touched the faint bioluminescent patterns that covered his body. An idea sparked. "Your light," she said. "Can you control it, make it brighter or dimmer?" Ghost concentrated, and his scales flared with luminescence, then dimmed to almost nothing. He could control it. "Use that," Rebecca urged. "He's used to fighting colored dragons. Your white scales reflect light differently. In the bright arena, you'll be harder to track if you keep your glow active. It'll mess with his depth perception." Ghost chirped understanding. "And don't try to win quickly. Tire him out. You're younger, you have more stamina. Let him exhaust himself chasing you." Lieutenant Ross appeared at the entrance. "Time's up." Rebecca hugged Ghost carefully, feeling his heart racing under the white scales. "You're not fighting to prove you're strong enough to live. You already proved that. You're fighting because someone needs to show them that their old ways are wrong." The amphitheater fell silent as Ghost entered the combat circle. Crane stood opposite, rolling his massive shoulders. The warrior looked bored, as if this fight was beneath him. Talvin raised one crystalline hand. "Traditional combat rules apply. Fight continues until one yields or cannot continue. Begin." Crane lunged immediately, expecting the hatchling to retreat. Ghost did retreat, but not in panic. He moved with deliberate precision, staying just out of reach. The warrior attacked again, claws extended. Ghost dodged, his white scales catching the arena lights and throwing off Crane's aim. The blow missed by inches. "Stop running, little curse," Crane growled. "Face me with honor." Ghost didn't respond. He circled, patient and watchful, his bioluminescence pulsing in steady rhythms. Crane charged, putting real power into his movement. Ghost waited until the last second, then dropped and rolled. The warrior crashed past him, momentum carrying him into the arena wall. The crowd gasped. A few Dracori even cheered. "That's it," Rebecca whispered. "Make him come to you." The fight continued for nearly 20 minutes. Crane attacked repeatedly, growing more frustrated with each miss. Ghost never struck back. Just evaded, his movements becoming more confident as the warrior grew tired. Then Crane made a mistake. Overextended on a claw swipe, he left his side exposed for just a moment. Ghost struck, not hard enough to seriously injure but precise enough to hit a pressure point. Crane's leg buckled. The warrior recovered quickly, but Ghost had proven something important. He could hurt Crane if he wanted to. He was choosing not to. "Enough playing," Crane roared, abandoning technique for pure aggression. That was his second mistake. As the warrior charged blindly, Ghost's scales flared with brilliant light. The sudden brightness in the arena overwhelmed Crane's vision. He couldn't adjust, couldn't track the white hatchling against the glare. Ghost moved behind him and struck the back of Crane's knee with his tail. The warrior went down hard. Before Crane could rise, Ghost positioned himself on the warrior's back, one clawed foot pressing against his neck. Not enough pressure to hurt, just enough to demonstrate control. The amphitheater erupted in chaos. Dracari shouted in disbelief while other species cheered. Lyra and the young Dracari were on their feet, crying and celebrating. Talvin approached the combat circle. "Crane, do you yield?" The warrior lay still for a long moment. Then, grudgingly, "I yield." Ghost stepped back immediately, releasing his opponent. Crane rose slowly, staring at the small white dragon who had defeated him. "How?" the warrior asked. Ghost made a soft chirping sound and turned away, returning to where Rebecca stood with Pearl and Frost. His siblings surrounded him, checking him for injuries with worried sounds. "The trial of worth is complete," Talvin announced. "Pearl, Frost, and Ghost have passed all tests. By ancient law and modern evidence, I declare them viable, healthy, and worthy of recognition as sentient beings." "No," Warchief Garen stepped into the circle. "I reject this outcome. Those creatures use tricks, deception, unnatural abilities. They are not true Dracari." "Perhaps not," said a voice from the crowd. An elderly Dracari emerged, scales faded with age. Behind her came more elders, at least 20 of them. "Perhaps they are what we lost when we chose fear over wisdom." The eldest approached Ghost slowly. She knelt, bringing herself to the hatchling's eye level. "My brother was white like you," she said softly. "They took him when I was small. I never forgot his face." She looked at Garen. "We never forgot what we did. Some of us just lacked the courage to speak until now." Rebecca's tablet chimed. The historical documents she'd found were uploading to the public station network, broadcasting to every screen in the amphitheater. Ancient texts appeared, showing the truth about void seers. "This is our history," Rebecca said loudly. "The real history. Albino dragons weren't cursed. They were eliminated because they threatened the wrong people's power." 18 months had changed everything. Rebecca stood at the observation window of what was now called the Sanctuary Wing, watching Pearl teach a group of newly arrived albino hatchlings how to navigate in darkness. The young dragons hung on her every word, their white scales glowing softly as they practiced the communication patterns she demonstrated. Arcturus 7 had become something unexpected. What started as one human saving 3 abandoned hatchlings had grown into a movement that shook the entire Dracari civilization. The first new hatchling arrived 3 weeks after the trial. A Dracari couple had traveled for days, carrying their albino daughter wrapped in blankets, terrified they'd be caught. They'd heard about Pearl, Frost, and Ghost. They'd seen the trial broadcast. They chose hope over tradition. More followed. Some came openly, defying clan elders and social pressure. Others arrived in secret, leaving hatchlings at the station entrance with notes begging for help. Each time, the human crew took them in, and each time, Pearl, Frost, and Ghost helped integrate the newcomers into their growing family. The Dracari government had fractured over the revelations. Warchief Garen was recalled to the homeworld to answer questions about his family's role in suppressing historical truth. Younger Dracari demanded reforms. Elder councils split between those clinging to tradition and those embracing change. But the clearest evidence that things were different stood in the sanctuary wing itself. 23 albino dragons, ranging from hatchlings to adolescents, all thriving under a care system designed by humans and taught by the first 3 survivors. Patricia Lee entered the observation area, carrying her ever-present tablet. The Galactic Council just approved our formal designation. Arcturus 7 is officially recognized as a protected sanctuary for endangered Dracari genetic minorities. How did the Dracari delegation vote? Rebecca asked. Split, 40% in favor, 30% against, 30% abstained. Patricia smiled. But that 40% would have been 0 2 years ago. Progress is progress. Frost appeared in the doorway, now the size of a small shuttle. He made a complicated series of chirps and light pulses. "He says Ghost wants you in the training bay," Patricia translated. She'd spent months learning to understand dragon communication, something about the new security protocols. Rebecca followed Frost through corridors that had been redesigned to accommodate dragon-sized residents. Human and Dracari crew members nodded greetings as they passed. Some of the Dracari were recent transfers, young dragons who specifically requested assignment to Arcturus 7 to help with sanctuary operations. Ghost had indeed grown massive. At full size, he stood nearly 12 feet tall at the shoulder, his white scales reflecting light in hypnotic patterns. But his personality hadn't changed. He still positioned himself protectively near any hatchling showing signs of distress. Today he was demonstrating defensive techniques to a group of adolescent dragons, not how to attack, but how to protect, how to de-escalate confrontations, how to use intelligence over aggression. "They learn fast," Lieutenant Ross said. He'd been promoted to security chief with special responsibility for sanctuary protection. "Ghost is a natural teacher." "He learned from the best," Rebecca replied, watching Ghost gently correct a young dragon's stance. A tone sounded through the station's comm system. "Dr. Walsh to the docking bay. You have visitors." Rebecca made her way to the arrival area, wondering who could be visiting unannounced. When the airlock opened, she stopped in surprise. 3 Dracari elders entered, their scales marked with traditional clan symbols. Behind them walked a younger dragon Rebecca recognized from news broadcasts. Prime Speaker Valen, the newly elected head of the Dracari Council, representing the reform movement. "Dr. Walsh," Valen's voice carried the formal tones of official business. "We come seeking guidance." "Guidance about what?" "How to undo 2,000 years of damage." One of the elders stepped forward. "I am Counselor Myra. My family holds records going back 70 generations. We found documentation of 12 major clan lines that carried the albino trait. All were systematically eliminated or driven into hiding. We believe there may be hidden communities," another elder added. "Dracari who have been hiding albino children for centuries, creating secret lineages separate from mainstream society." Rebecca's mind raced. You're talking about entire populations we don't know about. Entire populations who have lived in fear because of what we did. Valen looked uncomfortable. The Council has authorized a formal apology and reparations program, but we need help. We need experts who understand albino dragons, who can help us reach these communities safely. You want us to train your people. We want partnership. Valen gestured toward the sanctuary wing. What you've built here proves that coexistence works. Humans and Drakari working together, teaching each other. We need that on a larger scale. Pearl chose that moment to arrive, having heard the commotion. She was magnificent at full size, her scales almost translucent in certain light. Several younger hatchlings followed her, including the very first arrival after the trial. Valen stared. I've seen the broadcast, but seeing them in person is different. They're beautiful. They always were, Rebecca said quietly. Your people just forgot how to see it. Over the following weeks, Arcturus 7 became a training center. Drakari social workers, medical personnel, and counselors arrived to learn about albino care. Human specialists taught cross-cultural communication techniques. Pearl, Frost, and Ghost served as living proof that change was possible. The hardest part was reaching the hidden communities. Generations of fear couldn't be undone with simple announcements, but slowly, carefully, they made progress. A message here, a contact there, building trust one conversation at a time. The first hidden community that agreed to make contact was located on a remote moon in the Drakari frontier. 53 albino dragons had lived there for 6 generations, completely isolated from mainstream society. Rebecca joined the first contact team, along with Pearl and Counselor Myra. When their shuttle landed, the hidden dragons emerged from underground shelters, squinting in the bright sunlight they rarely experienced. An ancient dragon approached, scales faded almost to gray with age. You're real. We thought the broadcasts were propaganda, attempts to lure us out for elimination. You're safe now, Pearl said in flawless Drakari, and you're not alone anymore. The old dragon touched Pearl's face gently. I never thought I'd see the day. I was born in hiding, raised in fear. My children, my grandchildren, all taught that exposure meant death. That ends now, Myra said firmly. The Council guarantees your safety and full citizenship rights. It took 3 days to convince the community to return to Arcturus 7. Some chose to stay, too old or too traumatized to leave their sanctuary. But 37 agreed to come, especially the younger ones who'd never known anything but hiding. As their shuttle departed, Rebecca watched the hidden moon shrink in the viewport. How many more communities were out there? How many dragons had lived and died in isolation because of ancient prejudice? We'll find them, Pearl said, as if reading her thoughts. However long it takes, we'll find them all. Back at Arcturus 7, the arrivals process had become routine. Medical checks, psychological support, integration into the community. But Rebecca never let it become just routine. Each dragon represented a victory against ignorance, a life saved from unnecessary suffering. That evening, she sat in the sanctuary wing common area, surrounded by dragons of all ages. Some played complex games Patricia had designed. Others practiced flight maneuvers under Ghost's supervision. A few hatchlings slept in a pile near the temperature regulators, completely secure in their safety. Lieutenant Ross joined her with 2 cups of coffee. You know, when you first brought those 3 hatchlings into your quarters, I thought you were insane. I was a little insane, Rebecca admitted. Desperate people do desperate things. Desperate or not, you changed the world. Multiple worlds, actually. I just couldn't walk away from Bobby's in a garbage pile. Rebecca sipped her coffee. Anyone would have done the same. But they didn't. You did. Ross gestured at the peaceful scene around them. This started because one human refused to accept that some lives were disposable. That kind of stubborn compassion is apparently contagious. Frost approached, moving carefully to avoid disturbing the smaller dragons. He carried a data pad in his claws, which he presented to Rebecca. On the screen was a message from another hidden community. They were ready to make contact. Rebecca smiled. "Looks like we have work to do." "We always have work to do," Pearl said, reading over Rebecca's shoulder. "But that's okay. This is good work." Ghost rumbled agreement, and 23 dragons echoed the sentiment in chirps, growls, and pulses of light. Rebecca looked at these magnificent beings, each one proof that prejudice could be overcome, that fear could be replaced with understanding, and that sometimes the greatest strength was simply refusing to give up on someone else. "Yes," she said, "this is very good work indeed."